Fandom OCs are a lot of fun. However, for the longest time, I didn't see the appeal of them. This is partially because of how I typically interact with media, but I also learned to look down on them. Back when cringe comps and outright bullying masking as critique were trendy in the 2010s YouTube art sphere, fandom OCs were often propped up as examples of bad art and storytelling practice. They would be called shallow, self-serving, or damaging to the story. Never mind that their owners were often teenagers and that they would literally never have any effect on the trajectory of any given media's canon. While I grew out of being actively disdainful of fan OCs, I never really confronted my aversion towards them until I made some of my own. I'm 23 years old. This is my first time making fan OCs, and I surprised myself with just how much I grew to care about them. I would even go so far as to say that they helped me have fun with OCs again after struggling with them for a while. Anyway, originally, this video was only going to be about my relationship with fan OCs and how that shifted over time, using my Genshin OC Malachi as a case study. But as I was working on the script, considering how important a friend's OC was to his development and my investment in him, I thought it would be funny to bring her into the video in some way. At first, I thought it would be something like a cameo, but we both felt it would be more exciting for the video to take on a discussion format. So here's how that went. Okay, as evidence that we are in a YouTube video, we are artists on the internet. My name is Azriel.
And my name is Joy.
And we've been on the internet for about like the same amount of time at like similar age ranges, but our experience of the internet has been quite different.
Yeah.
Sound more enthusiastic. I'm not holding you hostage.
Sorry. Yay! Yippee!
Whoa. Calm down. Whoa. So, anyway, why don't we talk about those differences? What kind of platforms were you on, and what kind of stuff did you typically see while on the internet?
So many things in so many places. Oh god, okay. Going into my mind palace so I can remember everything. In a vague timeline, I had a DeviantArt for like a few months, maybe half a year, and then I had a Mino for like 2 years. For some period of time, I also had a Facebook, but I didn't really use it. And then I have had Instagram for about 7 or 8 years now, and then Twitter for maybe about like 6. Surprisingly, never had a Tumblr, even though, one would expect that of an online artist who happens to be queer and neurodivergent. But, I mean, what kind of stuff do children see on the internet in the 2010s? Everything! Yeah. Unfortunately.
Hooray for unregulated internet access. Woo!
Yay! It was great. Fantastic. And like when it comes to like the content and stuff that I saw on there, specifically when I was younger, I very much looked primarily for like fandom content, like AMVs or MMD animations or fan art or literally anything. Like YouTubers watching fan games of Five Nights at Freddy's or some shit. Like if it was out there, I probably saw it at some point in time, and I didn't really, I think, look for more individual original work outside of fandom spaces until I was a little bit older, which, from what I know, is a little different from you.
Yeah, it sure is, man. I mostly spent time on YouTube, I want to say, and I did have like classic Facebook that I never used, and then I was also first on Instagram, and then I've been like kind of exclusively on Instagram. There were times as like a teenager trying to branch out to other social medias but never really sticking because it was too much effort and I didn't want to manage a bunch of social media accounts. It was a headache
type shit.
So most of like the online content that I was seeing was the YouTube art community, which started mostly with like Mark Crilly art tutorials, how to draw manga, that kind of stuff. But then very notably in like the 2010 zone, when art critique quote unquote art critique YouTube channels became really popular, and I was exposed to a lot of really toxic and hateful rhetoric. It was so cool.
Yay!
I did over time detach myself from that when I jump scare drawing amino. I joined an amino, and I was like, it was the first time being in a community with other artists, so I wasn't as like crazy hateful of like, ugh, cringe, and I got to have a little bit more fun with art and OCs. But a lot of my feelings and relationship towards art was molded around that sort of very bad faith interaction, toxic, anti-cringe mindset that I would very, very slowly dismantle over time.
Yeah, it was kind of hard to escape that at all.
Yeah.
I remember, admittedly, despite being in like so many fandom spaces myself, are you aware of the like compilations that people would make on like YouTube, for example, of like cringe animation memes or cringe sans X OC shippers? I did partake in those, like watching them.
Damn.
So I feel like on some level that kind of stuff was unfortunately like unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from like occasionally watching that kind of stuff, I didn't partake in it. Thumbs up.
Awesome.
I very much, I mean, in middle school, I was still into fucking like My Little Pony. If I thought someone else was cringe, that would be a little hypocritical of me. But yeah, when it came to like interacting with those kinds of communities, when I was younger, it was less so about interacting with people and more so about just consuming shit and then putting shit out there in return. And I didn't think too hard. Now at 21, I'm like, I need to talk to other like-minded people or I'm going to fucking explode. But I didn't think too hard about that before. Even like now, kind of forgot to mention this earlier, I've had Discord for a while. And while I am in like some fandom spaces, when it comes to like fandom discords, for example, I don't really go out of my way to join them.
I similarly also only really get into spaces if I already have like an in of like a person that I know. And even then, it's very easy for me to get overwhelmed and scared out of like talking at all. So I will say a few things like the first couple days, and then over time, if I see that it's too big or there's too much activity, I'm like, I'm leaving, I'm out. But not literally. I don't leave the server, I just never talk ever again.
That's so real. That is so real. I'm literally the exact same way. Like, I'm in a fandom server for Ruby, favorite show ever, shout out. And I joined it because one of my friends is one of the moderators. But then the extent of my activity is like every once in a blue moon, I'll send a message in there. Half the time it's shit that I drew. And that's kind of like it.
That's so real. But yeah. You still, even if you weren't totally like super active or going out of your way to like connect with people that you didn't know, you were still like sharing things about your characters and stuff like that.
Oh my god, yeah. I remember back in ye old days of DeviantArt.com, I posted some OC art.
Jarvis, pull up the photos of Joy's DeviantArt.
No, please, don't do it.
Jarvis, pull up the photos of original Team Lilac.
No. Please don't do this to me.
But yeah, I did also share a little bit of my OCs for a time. Like, I mean, it was kind of the only thing I was trying to. So I would just post about them. And when I was on Amino, I would talk to my friends about them. But over time, I would become more and more like isolated with my characters because I'm Mr. Redesign. I love to redesign my characters for any reason at all. And from an outside perspective, that can feel really jarring, especially if there's like, a character of mine that you really like. And I'm like, sorry, they have a different name and a different look and a different everything, or they don't exist anymore. And it's like, whoa. So I didn't want anyone to have to deal with my shenanigans, so I stopped talking to anyone about my characters for like a really long time. And that sucked, honestly.
Yeah, that's fair. I admittedly, when it came to like my OCs and sharing information about them, I only shared that stuff with friends. Like I would post like maybe some drawings or whatnot of my OCs, but then I wouldn't attach any information about them. So the only people who knew anything about them were my friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I am the exact opposite. I am not John redesign. I am John create a character, have a story for them for a few months, and then I don't want to do this anymore, and I move on.
Damn, I'm turning you into John redesign.
Yeah, this is true.
Teehee.
Damn you.
Speaking of influencing one another, what? I famously do not do fandom OCs at all. Never. I never did before, historically.
And I famously do.
This is true. Jarvis, pull up the photos of Team Lilac again. Anyway,
No.
yes, so I only started very recently doing the fandom OC stuff, and I only extremely very recently started caring about my fan OCs, my Genshin OCs specifically.
Oh, yeah.
Because of Miss Fandom OCs over here telling me, hey, you should think about your fandom OCs. I have some too, and they could interact or something.
Yay! And that is how we got to where we are today.
To making this
3
video.
years later, which is crazy.
Oh, yeah.
That we've known each other that long.
What do you mean it's been 3 years? I thought we met like last year or something.
No, I fear not.
What the hell? But yeah, that means 3 years of our two favorite mentally ill siblings.
Yippee!
Katya and Malachi. This is what this video is actually about.
Yeah, Jarvis, pull up photos of Katya and Malachi.
Whoa! Jarvis, pull up my PDF sketchbook that is free to download on Ko-fi, where I have literally too many drawings of them in my sketchbook.
Jarvis, pull up the therapy bill that I owe him.
Anyway, back on subject. Yes.
Yes.
So the thing about Katya and Malachi is we didn't initially make them together for the sake of like doing things with them in a collaborative fashion.
Didn't we still somehow make them around the same time though?
I think so. You
like a few months or a year before we became friends.
Yeah, kind of. Like,
which is crazy.
When did you make Katya again?
One moment. This is Jarvis, cut that. I'm going to look it up real quick. And then you can like edit it in as if there was no pause whatsoever.
No, the full pause is going to make it into the video.
What? What? What?
One eternity later.
Like sometime in 2023, I think. Like, it's literally her birthday. I don't know why I'm forgetting it.
Good job. You're an awesome OC parent.
Thumbs up. Okay, hey, listen, you're new to fandom OCs. I'm new to OC birthdays.
Yes. And I made Malachi in 2022 on your birthday.
Whoa.
At the very least, I made his toy house profile on your birthday.
Whoa. My birthday.
Shout out. It was always meant to be.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to me. That's right. Now everybody knows when we recorded this video. Now all of China knows it's my birthday. Locking back in. So what we were actually interested in talking about was our Genshin OCs, Katya and Malachi, and how through our friendship, they changed a lot from when we initially created them. So, Joy, you present how they are now before we could talk about how they were before.
Sounds good. So in terms of like very basic information, if Katya and Malachi were real characters that you could play in-game, they're both 5-star catalysts from Snezhnaya and are members of House of the Hearth. The only real difference between the two of them in that manner is the fact that Katya is Electro and Malachi is Pyro. In terms of their basic like character premise and how like their dynamic functions, these two low-key inseparable. Katya is a very like stoic, stone-faced, she's here too. And Malachi, meanwhile, he's a little more like, not emotional per se, but he's a little more like open and expressive. And they really bounce off of each other, not only because of their different personalities, but also just like the way that they are fundamentally. Like Katya, she's very like tall and like physically intimidating, and Malachi, he's not short, but he's shorter.
Yeah.
And is more
he's
like lean.
5'3".
He is?
Wait, I need to double check.
No.
I made him shorter because he used to be 5'7".
I don't remember this.
But then I shrunk him because I realized that the human experimentation would affect his growth. So he would have been 5'7" if he got to grow up healthy. But in keeping that he didn't get to grow up healthy and normal, he's...
Okay, so correction, he is short.
He's 5'4". Yeah, he's 5'4".
Ezreal just didn't fucking tell me that.
I did tell you!
And if he did, I don't remember.
Well, that's your problem.
Anyway, so editing my statement, Katya is very like tall and like physically imposing, and then Malachi is like short and more lean. And while they are like different in these kinds of aspects, they're also similar in others. So they both primarily tend to work more so in the shadows. They're not very good at lying, which is ironic because they're in the House of the Hearth. Katya, she just can't do it. Malachi, you can read his ass like an open book. His little tiny kitty ears in his tail. I'll just give him away. But yeah, inseparable opposites, but also similar. Cling to each other because, yay, family.
Family, yay.
Thumbs up. They weren't always like this, though.
No,
they used to suck.
They used to be literally nothing.
Genuinely. A burger of nothingness.
A burger of nothingness. I will start by talking about how much of a nothing burger Malachi is to be. Back when I made him, I was a lot more afraid of playing around in the space or having my characters have any like meaningful impact with the canon or story in any way. So a lot of the choices that I made lean towards minimizing that impact, therefore leaving me with a very nothing of a character. So he used to be just a Fatui grunt, like ex-Fatui grunt who ran away, had no affiliation with the House of the Hearth whatsoever. My explanation for why he ran away was that he was like someone that the Tory had experimented on, but that reasoning had like just as much weight than if he, wasn't satisfied with his paycheck and decided to leave. Like ultimately, it didn't really do much for his character. And in terms of like his actual personality, he was your bog standard, really angry and bitter and brooding sort of like fugitive who's like, I'm so tortured because I can't like settle anymore or have friends or relationships or whatever. But without any characters for him to interact with, that didn't have a lot of weight to it. He was just alone by circumstance, but there was no tension that came from that. So yeah, when it comes to Katya.
Yeah, Katya, conversely, didn't even have any of that going on. The base information about Katya in terms of like her backstory or her lore was that she was part of the House of the Hearth. That's it. That's all I had.
Shout out.
Shout out. God, I originally made her either right before Fontaine came out or around the time. No, it was before. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was like before Fontaine came out. So we didn't even have Lynette, Lynette, or Fremine to work off of. All we had was very basic information about Arlecchino, who recently had been revealed in I can't remember the full title, but the Lotso video that showed all of the Harbingers.
The Winter
and then
Nights
whatever
Lotso.
Yes, that's what it was. And then all of the like bits and pieces that were sprinkled in the game itself. And genuinely, that was all that I had to work off of. So Katya's character was very much a chill guy. She didn't really have a personality. She didn't have any motivations. She just like followed orders to a T, and because she didn't really have a personality, she by default got along well with her hypothetical brothers and sisters in the Hearth because, I don't know, she was there. And there really was nothing that I could do with her because we had basically no information on the House of the Hearth, no information on, like, no concrete world information on, like, Snezhnaya, and everything that I could have hypothetically used to build her character or do something with her didn't exist. So she just kind of sat in my hypothetical closet for like a year or two.
And then she came out.
like-
Happy Pride, everybody.
Yay! Also, she's a lesbian.
Whoa. But yeah, no, actually what happened was that we became friends, and then we were getting the Fontaine updates at the same time, so we were getting a lot more lore about the House of the Hearth. So it's like the perfect opportunity to give our characters way more lore. And since we've known each other for 3 years and
Crazy.
God, we care so much about each other's characters, we know the other person's OC's lore like the back of our hand, which is why I will be the one to tell Katya's backstory and Joy will be the one to tell Malachi's backstory. So
starting with,
I'm going to talk about Katya because you just talked about her. So her thing now is that when she was very young, like not even conscious as a person, literal baby, her parents realized that they couldn't take care of her. They didn't have the means to do so. So they gave her to the totally legit, very trustworthy organization that is very responsible for how they take care of their kids, the House of the Hearth, which at the time was managed by Krusabina, who is definitely a normal maternal figure and not evil. Nothing bad happens to the kids in the House of the Hearth. Except, actually, that's all a lie, and Krusabina instills within her children this sort of might makes right mentality that only the strongest get to survive, and you have to be willing to cut down anyone in your way, including your own siblings. And if you cannot prove your worth, then you are useless and disposable. So Katya grows up with this very totally healthy and normal mentality and carries that with her when Arlecchino takes control of the House of the Hearth. And when she's sent on a mission that fails because her siblings give up on the mission and her. So they come back and are like, oh no, so sorry we couldn't do it, father. And also don't worry. Oh, I mean, yeah, Katya's dead, but don't worry about it. Katya's like ingrained sense of her like survival being tied to her ability to succeed pushes her to actually return to the House of the Hearth, succeeding in the mission, but completely like at the cost of her physical well-being. She's all beat up. Her arm, her right arm, is that it?
Yes.
Her right arm is completely frostbitten, and she, upon reaching the like front doors of the House of the Hearth, she conks out immediately. Now she doesn't expect to survive or like make it any further than that. She doesn't expect to be alive. And then when she does wake up, she would assume that it would be like in like a dump somewhere or in Dottore lab, because that's what happened to children who like got 2 severe injuries when they were under Krusabina. Instead, she finds that she is still in the House of the Hearth and that she has gained a vision alongside a prosthetic arm. So under Arlecchino, she realizes that she is no longer disposable and that the lives of the children do actually matter, which solidifies her loyalty to Arlecchino.
Yay, father!
Yay!
Malachi, meanwhile, did somewhat get to grow up with his family for like a brief period of time. Big family.
Yeah.
Both parents, yippee. Several siblings, yippee. Also a village, yippee. However, Malachi was not a normal boy, but he'll get into that later.
Yay.
So at the age of like 8, right?
Yeah.
At the age of 8, everything went wrong. A big disaster happened. His parents died. It was horrible. And so Malachi gets picked up by none other than the House of the Hearth. And then Krusabina's like, wait a minute, this boy ain't normal, and ships him off to Dottore. Good things do not happen when Dottore is involved. No. And so, as Dottore does, human experimentation, yippee, bit of God remains, bit of whatever the fuck else he was doing in there. It really stunted his growth, but also simultaneously made him physically old. So he looks like a very short old man.
Yeah.
And eventually he manages to get a vision and then uses that to escape the lab and is then on the run. And at that point, Arlecchino is the head of the House of the Hearth, and she finds out about him somehow, some way, as she does with literally everything, and gives a certain someone the task of hunting him down and bringing him back. And I wonder who that could be.
You'll never guess who it is.
That's right, guys. It's Katya! Yeah!
No way! So yeah, obviously, that is a big change from having literally nothing in terms of backstory. And that is all a result of the power of friendship, baby. So, Joy, you can get into exactly how those changes affected Katya, since we just mentioned her, and she's the one who yoinked Malachi off of the streets.
Man, it's almost as if you don't want to start these topics.
What are you talking about? I'm like a good host, am letting my guests speak first.
So, the thing with Katya, compared to the 180 low-key that Malachi experienced, a lot of her like character writing changes are a lot more like internal, if that makes sense. Physically, she's still very like stoic, imposing. The only real physical difference, besides the mini redesign, is the fact that she's buff as hell. Shout out.
Yay.
But in terms of like her like ambitions or motivations and stuff like that, when I originally made her, had no idea what to do with her in that context. And I'm no stranger to like making characters just for fun. Like I had one OC who for years was just a joke character basically. So I'm not opposed to the idea, but like with Katya, there just was nothing to work off of. Like I couldn't even make her a joke character because still to this day at the point of recording, we don't have Snezhnaya.
No, we don't. We don't know what's going on there.
We don't. I couldn't even put her in the world. And so then I became friends with this fucking guy.
What?
And like Malachi entered the lore of Katya, and suddenly there were so many possibilities. Because like what was said earlier, we also became friends around the time that Fontaine was coming out. So I had Malachi to work off of, but also all of the like in-game information that was being handed to us. And suddenly I got to consider so many different possibilities for Katya's character. Like, why is she so blindly loyal to Arlecchino? Because of her arm. What does she think of the mission to capture Malachi? She doesn't, because she's so blindly loyal. What does she think of Malachi? That's where it starts to get a little complicated. And then, like, as Malachi's character developed, so too did Katya's. And we really, like, over time worked out, like, a back and forth between the two. Without saying too much about Malachi, because that's, like, your job. It was a lot of, like, how does Malachi's more open expressiveness contrast Katya's stoic nature? Also, how does, like, his existence make her question the foundation of her entire life, basically? And also, you know, True Sabina being revealed into lore and, like, okay, how do I work that into Katya? So it was a lot of, like, while we were friends, so many different pathways opened up to me for things that I never would have considered beforehand. And through that, I really got to just play around with Katya and figure out what it was that I wanted with her. For example, I very much enjoy kind of stories about characters that are part of a machine, if that makes sense. Like, for example, my favorite show ever is literally about people who fight monsters for a living, but then, oh no, there's this, like, immortal evil that's trying to destroy the world, and all of the characters who happen to be teenagers are thrown into that war. So, like, I love stories like that really touch on what that can do to a person. And, like, with Katya, I get to explore that, especially because of the way that True Sabina was and how the hearth was under her. So where Katya originally had literally nothing going for her, now she is a soldier before she is a person. and like her orders and the goal of the hearth are what drive her to do what she does. And then enter a certain cat man boy thing, and suddenly all of that is disrupted, and she has to reanalyze how she interacts with her fellow siblings. Because she already somewhat had to when Arlecchino became father, but now it's like she can't avoid it anymore. She has to reassess and readjust everything. And I love having to like navigate that and write stuff out. It's amazing.
Yippee!
It's great.
Since there were mentions of the interesting ways that Katya bounced off of Malachi, in much the same way, I changed a lot of Malachi in order to find like more interesting ways for him to interact with her, as well as the House of the Hearth in general. So like I explained before, he was much more of your archetypical, bitter, jaded, pessimistic, like fugitive. But with the introduction of Katya being a very stoic person who was like very much like beat down by the things that she experienced and remolded herself into something very like, well, inhuman in order to survive the things that she did, it was no longer interesting to have Malachi also be such a like a negative and pessimistic character. It didn't present for very much interesting back and forth between them. So gradually over time, he became a lot more vulnerable and hopeful. And in those changes to his characters, in trying to find ways to contrast him to his surroundings, it made me a lot more willing to explore things that I historically was too afraid to. For instance, like the whole thing of him being entirely unimportant. Well, now he's like kind of the reincarnation of a god. So I wanted to, first of all, put more importance on the like Dottore experimentation thing. And then also give an actual reasoning as to why Arlecchino would go through the trouble of getting Malachi back. Because yes, she is a very sympathetic character and she's very interesting and does genuinely care for the well-being of her children. She is still also the boss of an intelligence organization. So I had to find a way for him to be worth the trouble of actually collecting again. Hence the thing about God Remains, which we do have, like, we've seen it in the Genshin Impact webcomic with Kale, that Dottore has experimented with God Remains and seeing how that interacted with humans. And we only have the one example with Kale, and in game that doesn't really have much of an effect anymore on her since it's like sealed away. So I wanted to try my hand at like making my own thing of like, okay, if Malachi had God Remains superpowers, how would that manifest? That which led me to creating my own god to put in Genshin Impact. Yeah. And the dangerous thing is that since Snezhnaya isn't out yet, we don't know what the god's situation is over there. It is entirely possible that they have their own adaptation of the same mythological creature that I'm pulling from. I really hope not, but otherwise, yeah, this pushed me to interact with the lore of the world in ways that I was otherwise too afraid to. And then in terms of his character and personality, I had to find the actual reasoning of why is he so vulnerable or trusting with the person who was literally sent to capture him? Like, how does he feel about being back in this organization that once like sent him off to the person that ruined his life? And so I got to think a lot about, first of all, like his actual history before everything happened to him. I gave him a big family and that prior formative experience of being loved and being surrounded by a bunch of people. And then having that being taken away from him. So that formed why fundamentally he is in search of community. He wants it really badly. And so obviously, like when he's, for the first time in a really long time, he's given a stable community, he latches onto it for dear life. And then I got to think about, okay, what are some other interesting things about him and this family dynamic that he now finds himself in? Like, how does his new past interact with everything? How can I get more tension out of this? So I made him, since he was like a little baby boy kid, baby, in his family, he's used to being the runt of the litter. outsider essentially, and then being in this new environment where all of a sudden the consequences are no longer just whether or not you have food on the table or if you upset a sibling or your parents for something silly. Now the consequences is you mess up and you potentially die or you potentially kill one of your siblings. The stakes have skyrocketed. So coming in with that feeling of inadequacy and then the consequences being 1,000 times more dramatic does something to him, especially since the person he trusts the most and the person that he compares himself to is literally the most efficient and capable person in the entire organization. And then I could complicate that further with the God Remains stuff. So how do I make the God Remains conflict with his desires? Oh, make it so that it makes him dangerous in some way to the people around him. What's the most interesting way to do that? By affecting his ability to communicate. I give him powers where he can essentially mind control people or affect them through his speech. And if he can't control that, suddenly that affects the stakes of being able to communicate with the people that he loves. Can he get his point across without something terrible happening? And so now there's so many complex things of he wants to be capable and wanted and needed in this family, but he also is extremely afraid of being unmanageable because of the things that he can't control. So on the one hand, he wants to become stronger. But on the other hand, if he becomes too strong to the point that the people around him, and especially Katya, the person that initially was the one who reined him in, and so far the only person who is able to consistently beat him, so to speak. If there is a day that he surpasses her, then what happens when there's a real danger and he actually puts them in danger? Who is going to stop him? And those are all a bunch of things that I simply could not do when he was alone and your standard grumpy, life is so terrible and everything sucks kind of guy.
God, even just talking about them is doing me psychic fucking damage.
We have to draw them again.
We do. I need you, the audience, to know that we have done multiple full takes of this, and the more we talk about them, the more I want to throw myself out of a window.
What? They can't know that this took multiple takes. This is
totally
natural.
Yeah,
we didn't need to practice at all.
We're so eloquently well spoken that to even think of having to rehearse such a simple conversation.
We get our ideas across.
Imagine me with a teacup.
The image of Winnie the Pooh. This is my first time in a long time. I want to say that I got to enjoy myself with such low stakes with OCs. And it is also my very first time experiencing this collaborative aspect of fandom OCs, which I would assume you, Joy, John, fandom OC, it's not your first time experiencing something like this.
Oh yeah, definitely not. Yeah, no, thinking back, there were some friends on Amino that we had collab OCs together, and then some friends that I had on Instagram over quarantine, and then other people in fandoms that I was in general, on Twitter, and then some Discord friends and whatnot. It's very much when you're in online fandom spaces for so long, because of the general sense of community, it's really easy to be oh, you have an OC from the same media that I do, they should be friends and we should talk about them or whatever, and it would be really cool. So definitely not the first time I've experienced it, and definitely not the last, as is evident by our continuous habit of making our friends, or making our OCs friends in some way or another. Yeah, no, it's very common. Don't even really think about it. It just happens.
Yeah. Malachi and Katya was entirely accidental. We started it out as a joke.
It was a joke. Jarvis, pull up the drawing.
Jarvis, pull up the screenshots.
And then pull up the original and then the other iterations. Thumbs up. But yeah, no, very much commonplace in the fandom experience. Yeah, I set that up I was going to say something else, but no, it's your turn now.
Awesome,
it's
thanks.
Our turn, bro.
It's our turn, bro. Yes, I will say that although I haven't been doing like the fandom OC thing for a very long time, I can speak on how much it sucks to not like share anything about your or to not have community, because like I said before, there was a period of time where I became really insecure about sharing my characters because I was like too afraid of my inability to commit to things and how that would impact somebody else's enjoyment of my characters. So I would focus so much on trying to get them to a point where they were ready to be shared, but I could never really find things that I could stick to. It was really difficult for me to be satisfied with anything that I came up with. And with every change I would make, it didn't feel necessarily meaningful or like I was improving anything, which is in contrast to the way that I approach my Genshin OCs now, in which I have a 1 hour and 20-minute long video where I tier list rank all of the redesigns that I did of my Genshin OCs. I'm kind of tweaking Malachi's design right now. I have not stopped redesigning things. I have not stopped
he's
changing
Mongolian
things.
now.
He's ethnically Mongolian now. Shout out. But now, these changes are coming from still a desire to improve, but this time it actually feels like I'm improving because now I have the IP to prop my ideas against, like the solid ground of the canon. And you and I are both the type of people to care a lot about sticking to canon and respecting the rules that are set in place by the world. So they feel like a solid foundation for me to work off of and bounce off of in ways that I couldn't get with my own ideas because I was so afraid of committing to things and afraid of having ideas. So now all of my changes feel meaningful and like I'm actually going towards improving my characters so that they interact with the world in more interesting ways. So to all the people who were like, fandom OCs are cringe and bad and shallow and are not respectful of somebody's enjoyment of the media and inconsiderate of other people, go suck some shorts, because that's not true.
You're stupid and dumb and wrong.
Fandom OCs are a lot of fun actually and can be really collaborative and awesome. Obviously, sure, there are going to be people who have like the wrong take or do things that are like really super overly indulgent at the cost of the canon. But who gives a damn?
Yeah, low key, who fucking cares?
It's not going to actually do anything to the canon of the story, and it is not your job to worry about whether or not some guy on the internet, certainly not some teenager for the most part, how their like storytelling abilities are.
Hating on teenagers on the internet? Who would do that? A loser.
But yeah, everybody make more friends, make fandom OCs. It's really cool.
It's so awesome and cool.
Yeah. And thank you, Joy, for being here on the call to talk with me about it.
Yay! Yippee!
Hi, Scripted Me is back to close out the video. I hope you found it entertaining. Joy and I had a lot of fun recording. She doesn't have a YouTube channel yet, so if you want to check out her stuff, go follow her on Twitter and Instagram. I'll link her stuff in the description. I'd love to do something like this again, but probably not in the immediate future. I'd also really like to talk about more of my Genshin OCs individually. I'm just not really sure how to format that in a way that I find interesting. I definitely could do videos where I just talk about their lore, but considering the fact that they tend to shift and evolve as time passes, I don't think I would really enjoy making videos effectively setting their lore and personalities in stone. I'll find a way to do it if it's something I really want to do, but I'm also open to hearing what you might be interested in seeing of my fandom OCs, if anything at all. That said, if you'd like to have more of an influence on the subject matter of my videos, or to know what I'm working on in advance, consider checking out my Ko-fi memberships where you can get a number of perks, including having your name featured at the end of my videos, like Noelle and Andromeda. If you don't want to sign up for a membership, you can commission me, but if you can't or don't want to, that's completely fine. Watching and interacting with this video is free, alongside following my social medias like Instagram and Blue Sky if you were so inclined. I really appreciate it. That's all from me. Thank you again, and I should be back next month.
Welcome back to my YouTube channel.
No. This isn't your channel. Make your own, loser, bum. Anyway.
What? What?
Anyway. And At 1,000 views, Joy will make her own YouTube channel.
What?
This level of... Is that a kitty cat I hear?
Yeah, sorry.
Who's there?
She just woke up.
Aw.
It's Luna.
Yay, Luna! Okay.
Yay.
Anyway, I need to log the freak back in. Luna, do you want to be in the video?
Do you want me to take a picture of her so we can add it in?
Yes! Luna, be in the video. Luna, if we put you in the video, we're going to go viral. Can you believe this? Luna, the success of the video hinges entirely upon you.
Luna, the people will love you.